It's early morning, somewhere in occupied Europe, and a group of German mechanics stand in a dusty courtyard staring at a machine they've never quite seen before. It's a small vehicle by their standards, almost modest, stripped of the imposing armor or ornate details common in German engineering. Its paint is chipped, its windshield cracked, and yet it exudes something they can't ignore: confidence. The American Jeep, captured after a skirmish, sits before them like a stray dog that wandered behind enemy lines. One of the mechanics leans forward, curious, tracing the hood with his fingertips. It feels rugged, not refined. There are no delicate curves, no polished metal fittings. Everything about it seems simple. And that simplicity is exactly what makes it dangerous. For years, German engineering had built a reputation of being methodical, precise, and obsessively detailed. Every tank, every truck, every piece of machinery was designed to be a masterpiece, a finely tuned instrument that required equally fine hands to operate and maintain. But as the war dragged on, the German war machine began to strain under its own complexity. Spare parts were hard to come by, repairs took time, and even the most well-built vehicles could be temperamental in the field. The Jeep, on the other hand, told a different story. It wasn't built to impress engineers. It was built to keep soldiers alive. A mechanic climbs behind the wheel, hesitating for a moment. He expects resistance, maybe a set of complicated switches or levers. Instead, he finds something shockingly familiar: a steering wheel, 3 pedals, a gear shift that looks almost laughably basic. He turns the ignition. The engine coughs once, then growls to life. The sound startles a few of the others. Its rawness is different from the clean hum of German engines. It sounds like something alive. He presses the accelerator gently, and the Jeep rolls forward like it's been waiting for this moment all along. The Germans had never designed anything like this because their philosophy didn't allow it. To them, a machine was a reflection of power, control, and precision. To the Americans, a machine was a means to an end. If it could start fast, carry soldiers, and survive a battlefield, then it was good enough. It didn't need to be elegant, it needed to be unstoppable. And in that dusty courtyard, those Wehrmacht mechanics suddenly understood the quiet genius of their enemy's design. They take the Jeep apart piece by piece, expecting to find secrets hidden beneath the hood. Instead, they find simplicity layered on top of more simplicity. The chassis is straightforward, the drivetrain is robust. The suspension is built for punishment, not parade grounds. There are no unnecessary components, no fragile parts that could break in the cold mud of the Eastern Front or the dusty fields of France. One mechanic mutters something under his breath. Another nods slowly, as if they've just uncovered an uncomfortable truth. This machine wasn't just built to move. It was built to win wars. Contrast that with what they're used to working on. German vehicles like the Kübelwagen or the Opel Blitz were mechanically sound, yes, but they required trained personnel, regular maintenance, and specialized parts. A broken axle or a flooded engine could sideline an entire convoy. The American Jeep, however, seemed to laugh in the face of hardship. It could be pushed, pulled, or fixed with minimal tools. A few bolts here, a wrench there, and it was ready to roll again. That was revolutionary. One of the senior mechanics gestures toward the Jeep's body panels, pointing out how they can be removed with a few screws. No heavy equipment needed. No factory workshop. This thing was designed so a soldier in the middle of nowhere could fix it in minutes. Another points at the tires. They're standardized, interchangeable. If one blows, you just replace it with another from any Jeep in the fleet. No custom fittings, no special alignment, just practicality in its purest form. It wasn't beautiful engineering, but it was brilliant. They test the Jeep on uneven ground, deliberately pushing it into potholes and shallow ditches. It bounces back like a stubborn mule, refusing to get stuck. They turn it sharply on loose gravel, expecting it to skid or struggle. It doesn't. They even drive it over a patch of wet mud, laughing as the small machine plows through without hesitation. One of them jokes, half serious, that this little American box could probably make it all the way to Moscow before breaking down. Another laughs, but it's the uneasy kind of laugh, the kind that comes when you realize your opponent might be playing a smarter game than you are. Back in their workshops, they report their findings up the chain of command. This vehicle, they say, is unlike anything they've built. It's not sophisticated. It's not armored. But it's agile, durable, and everywhere. And that last word, everywhere, sticks in their minds. The Germans were used to deploying vehicles in carefully organized units, each supported by supply lines and logistics. But the Americans, they seemed to scatter Jeeps like seeds across the landscape. They could appear anywhere, at any time. That meant mobility. And in modern war, mobility could be deadlier than a tank. As the sun dips lower, One of the mechanics parks the Jeep beside a German staff car. The contrast is almost symbolic. The staff car gleams with polished fittings and precise lines. It's elegant, like a statement of authority. The Jeep looks battered, dirty, utilitarian. One is a symbol of power. The other is a tool of war. And in that quiet moment, the men around it know which one would actually survive a battlefield. They never say it out loud, but it's there in their eyes. Admiration, envy, and a faint trace of fear. Because this isn't just a vehicle. It's a reminder that while the Axis forces built machines to dominate, the Allies built machines to endure. And endurance in war often outlasts dominance. One of the younger mechanics asks why they never built something like this themselves. The older man shrugs. Because we build for control, he says quietly. They build for the fight. And right there, in the dusty twilight of a captured base, a group of Wehrmacht mechanics come to a realization their leaders might never admit sometimes. The simpler machine wins the war. The Jeep isn't just a machine, it's a message. And the more the Wehrmacht mechanics work with it, the clearer that message becomes. This is a vehicle born not in marble, floored design halls or meticulous engineering chambers, but in muddy fields and fast-moving fronts. It's the kind of machine that doesn't ask for permission, it just goes. As they continue to test it, to push it, to understand it, they begin to see what their commanders might not. The Jeep embodies a strategy that's fundamentally different from their own. Germany's war machine is built like a watch. Elegant, precise, but fragile when exposed to the chaos of real war. The American war machine is built like a hammer, unrefined perhaps, but devastatingly effective. A hammer doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to hit hard and keep hitting. And that's what the Jeep represents, the hammer strike of mobility. Out in the fields, they start running side-by-side comparisons. They bring out a Kübelwagen, the closest German equivalent. It's a decent machine, light and maneuverable, but it was designed for neat roads and predictable conditions. The Jeep, on the other hand, behaves like it was born in the mud. It doesn't flinch at rough patches. It doesn't complain at steep angles. It simply does what it's told. The Kübelwagen has style, a clean design, an air of calculated efficiency. The Jeep has something else entirely, instinct. One of the mechanics, a veteran of the Eastern Front, shakes his head as he watches it power through a rut the Kübelwagen struggles with. He's seen entire convoys get stuck in the mud before. He's seen men forced to abandon equipment simply because it couldn't keep up with the pace of war. And here stands this captured Jeep, grinning at their misery with its toothy grill, as if mocking the very idea of getting stuck. It doesn't have to be elegant. It just has to keep moving. The difference isn't just in the build, it's in the philosophy behind it. German engineers design machines for victory parades. American engineers design machines to survive hell. Every inch of the Jeep speaks of necessity. The flat fenders aren't an aesthetic choice. They're a step for soldiers. The folding windshield isn't a gimmick. It's so a machine gunner can fire without obstruction. Even the shape of its body isn't about beauty. It's about fitting into planes, ships, and convoys with brutal efficiency. There is nothing on this vehicle that doesn't serve a purpose. The more the mechanics disassemble it, the more they understand why it's everywhere. This thing can be built quickly, repaired easily, and transported cheaply. It doesn't require elite mechanics or precision factories. It can be fixed by a farmhand with a wrench. If a part breaks, you swap it out with another. If something bends, you straighten it with a hammer. It's not just a vehicle, it's a philosophy of war built on the idea of more. More Jeeps, more mobility, more reach. Where the Germans build a few exquisite machines, the Americans build thousands of good enough ones. And in the scale of war, good enough wins. News filters through the workshop, stories from the front. American Jeeps are everywhere, pulling artillery, ferrying officers, evacuating the wounded, leading convoys, scouting ahead of tanks. Soldiers use them as ambulances, command cars, weapon platforms, and even makeshift battering rams. The Germans had categories for everything: trucks, scout cars, staff cars. But the Americans have one machine that does it all. One of the younger mechanics leans back against the hood and lets out a low whistle. One machine for everything, he mutters. The others nod. That's the kind of idea that can change the tempo of war. They can't help but admire its audacity. Where they've been taught to think in terms of precision and hierarchy, the Jeep defies all neat categories. It's as comfortable in the mud as it is on a road, as useful to a general as it is to a private. That universality is something their own designs lack. The German vehicles were designed with intent, but also with rigidity. They perform brilliantly within a narrow band of conditions. Step outside that band and they falter. The Jeep, by contrast, thrives in chaos, And war is nothing if not chaos. Late one night, after the rest of the unit has turned in, two of the mechanics sit on the hood of the Jeep smoking cigarettes. The night is cold, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones. One of them taps the hood with his boot. "You know," he says softly, "if we had 1,000 of these, we'd never be stuck again." The other laughs a short, bitter sound. "If we had 1,000 of these," he replies, "would be fighting a different war." Because that's the truth they've started to understand. The Jeep isn't just faster or lighter or more flexible. It represents a way of thinking that prioritizes movement over perfection, adaptability over rigidity, scale over precision. It's why the Americans can surge forward, while the Germans constantly have to plan, repair, and adjust. It's why their convoys can keep rolling even when the terrain turns against them. The Jeep doesn't wait for the perfect road. It makes its own. When they test its speed, the mechanics are surprised again. It accelerates smoothly, not like a race car, but with a kind of eager energy. It's light on its feet. It feels less like driving a vehicle and more like steering momentum. They push it through obstacles, gravel, steep inclines. It keeps going. They splash it through water and mud. It doesn't hesitate. The Kübelwagen and the heavier trucks would have been whining by now, demanding maintenance. The Jeep just shrugs it off. They begin to think about how this machine fits into the larger picture. The American forces don't just have one or two of these. They have thousands. That means wherever their troops go, these little workhorses go with them. A broken bridge, the Jeep can ford the river. A rough track, it can climb. A last-minute push through enemy lines, the Jeep can keep up. It's not an accessory to their strategy. It is their strategy. Some of the men quietly admit what they wouldn't dare say aloud to their officers. The Germans might have the better tanks, the more precise artillery, the more elegant vehicles. But the Americans have something more dangerous: mobility. And mobility turns battlefields into a chessboard where they can move more pieces faster, with less friction. The Jeep is a pawn, yes. But it's a pawn that moves like a queen. One of the older mechanics runs his hand across the steering wheel, and for a moment he imagines what it would be like to drive this little machine across the front lines. Not in captivity, not as a curiosity, but as part of a force that knows no stillness. He imagines roads conquered not by heavy panzers, but by thousands of these buzzing creatures, slipping through cracks, outmaneuvering everything in their path. It's a frightening image, because while Germany builds power, America builds momentum, and momentum is harder to stop than power. As dawn begins to break, the mechanics reluctantly park the Jeep and cover it. The air smells like diesel and wet earth. They know they'll have to report their findings again soon. But none of them need a report to understand what they've witnessed. This isn't just a vehicle, it's a revelation, and revelations have a way of reshaping wars. The next morning, word spreads that higher command wants the Jeep moved. The mechanics have spent days with it now, driving it, taking it apart, pushing its limits, trying to understand what makes it so maddeningly effective. In that short time, it's become more than a machine to them. It's a mirror, reflecting everything they never questioned about their own war effort. They wheel it out of the workshop, the sun catching the dull green paint. It looks like a toy next to the proud, angular shapes of German vehicles. But every man watching knows which one they'd rather have when the road turns rough. An officer arrives, his boots polished, his expression unreadable. He walks around the Jeep slowly, like he's examining some curious artifact. The mechanics stand stiffly at attention. They know what this is: the formal evaluation. Reports will be written, comparisons will be made. But they also know what no report will ever fully capture: the feeling of driving it. The way it responds instantly, the way it makes bad terrain feel like a suggestion instead of an obstacle. You can't put that into charts and tables. You have to experience it to understand. The officer climbs in and starts the engine. The growl is familiar now, a steady heartbeat instead of a shock. He drives it in a tight circle, then speeds off toward the edge of the yard. Dust kicks up in a long, confident plume. The Jeep moves like it's been here all along, like it's not a foreign machine but a creature of the land itself. It doesn't matter who's behind the wheel. It wants to move. And in war, that hunger to move is everything. When he returns, the officer doesn't speak for a moment. He just sits there, hands still gripping the wheel, processing. One of the senior mechanics sees the look in his eyes. It's the same look they all had when they drove it for the first time, a mix of surprise, respect, and a reluctant kind of envy. The officer finally steps out and dusts off his gloves. "Interesting," he says curtly, but the mechanics know that word means more than it sounds. It means, this changes things. The conversation among the soldiers afterward is quieter than usual. They don't talk about strategy. They don't have to. Everyone knows what they've seen. One of the younger mechanics leans against a crate and whispers, "If they build 10 of these, they'll have an advantage. If they build 10,000, he doesn't finish the sentence. He doesn't have to. They all know the end of that thought. What the Americans have built isn't just a vehicle, it's a force multiplier. It doesn't need to be the strongest thing on the battlefield. It only needs to be everywhere at once. The Germans know what it takes to move a convoy. The Americans can do it with a handful of jeeps and some rope. German tanks are fast, but they need good roads and constant maintenance. The jeep doesn't care where it goes. It thrives in the gaps between the German lines, the spaces that weren't supposed to matter. But in modern war, those gaps are where momentum is born. One of the mechanics starts to compare it to German tanks, not in size or firepower, that would be absurd, but in philosophy. The Panzer IV is a statement heavy, precise, intimidating. The jeep is a whisper that becomes a storm. You can hear the tank before you see it. You can't hear the jeep until it's already behind you. Tanks conquer cities. Jeeps conquer the spaces between them. And if the spaces belong to your enemy, your army starts to suffocate. That's the unsettling truth dawning on them. The Americans don't just fight differently, they move differently. While German units spend hours coordinating and maintaining, American units can keep flowing like water, finding the path of least resistance. The jeep doesn't demand infrastructure, it creates it. Wherever it rolls, it turns wilderness into roadway, uncertainty into mobility. And mobility, they've begun to realize, can undo even the strongest defenses. As the days pass, the mechanics get orders to send the jeep further up the chain for technical analysis. They're reluctant to let it go. They've grown attached, in a strange way, not out of loyalty but out of respect. One of them runs his hand across the hood before it's loaded onto a transport truck. The paint is rough, chipped, practical. He's touched smoother metal before, but never something that felt this alive. When it's finally driven away, the yard feels quieter, emptier. The Kübelwagen sits nearby, clean and proper, but it doesn't hold their gaze anymore. Once you've driven something that moves like freedom, everything else feels like a cage. That night, over cigarettes and cold rations, they talk about what the future might look like. One man says, "If they have enough of these, they don't need to fight us head on." Another replies, "They'll just go around." The others nod slowly. It's a chilling thought. The German war machine is built to face the enemy directly, to crush them in carefully orchestrated battles. But the jeep is built to dance around those battles entirely. In their minds, they start to imagine what it must feel like to be an American soldier with one of these at his disposal. You don't wait for supply trucks. You don't dread the mud. You don't fear being stranded. You can be here 1 hour 5 kilometers away the next. You can strike, retreat, appear somewhere unexpected. You own the battlefield because you own the movement. And somewhere deep down, beneath layers of pride and uniform, they know that's the kind of edge that wins wars. A few weeks later, when reports filter back to their unit, they're not surprised. Command is impressed. The captured jeep is to be carefully studied. But what they can't replicate is what matters most. Not the steel, not the shape, but the philosophy behind it. You can copy the bolts in the engine. You can't copy the idea of building something this simple, this effective, without ego. That's what gnaws at the older mechanics the most. German design is brilliant, but it's proud. The jeep is brilliant, but it's humble. It knows exactly what it is. It doesn't try to be anything more. And because of that, it does everything better. They hear rumors too. Rumors of more jeeps flooding the front lines, of entire American columns moving with a speed and fluidity that seems impossible. Some scoff, some grow quiet. But those who've driven the captured jeep don't doubt it for a second. They've seen the future of the battlefield. It's not a massive tank or an expensive armored column. It's a simple machine with a grin, like grill, 4 tires, and a stubborn refusal to stop. In the final days before they're reassigned, the senior mechanic finds himself standing at the edge of the yard, looking out at the road. He imagines the sound of those engines, not the heavy rumble of panzers, but the quick, confident growl of something light, fast, unstoppable. For the first time, he feels something he never expected to feel toward the enemy's machine: respect, and maybe even a trace of fear. Because the jeep isn't just a vehicle, it's a promise that war will not be won by who builds the most powerful machines, but by who moves the fastest, adapts the quickest, and refuses to be slowed down. It's the quiet kind of power, the kind that sneaks in, surrounds you, and wins before you even realize the fight has changed. The war is far from over. But deep in the hearts of those mechanics, a small voice whispers what they won't admit aloud. If they had machines like that on their side, maybe everything would look different.